So I've had some people ask me about doing relational databases, so let's just dive right in. This is a little program I wrote called SQL Fun, and it was written to create tables, insert records, and do selects and show you how to do relational database stuff. I did a little bit of documentation here at the top of my program. I usually do that in most of my programs. So the next guy who, or gal, who comes across it can use that code and they can know where it came from. So let's just jump right down to the code. I'm connecting to my database here, and I've got a cool little routine called MySQL Pretty Table. Now let's go take a peek at that. MySQL Pretty Table has some styling up here with CSS, and then it's this nice short little program of 63 lines, and I'm using primarily this function called list tables. And list tables calls the pretty up stuff, the CSS right there. And then I'm about here to do some time capturing. So that starts the stopwatch. And then I have the include that was passed to the function from the calling program. And okay, cut that out. Coming back. And then I have number of columns, and this comes right down and sets another pretty up stuff. And we've got found, however many rows it found, and however many columns it found. And then I've got the list, and this is going to loop through and get the field names for each field. And I'm going to do a table. I started the table up here, got my table row, and then I'm going to say the row number, and then it's going to loop through right here all of the fields in the table, and it's going to tell me the name of the field, and it's going to tell me this little fun function is calling number to text, which comes down here and it translates the number of the field type to a name. And then it's going to tell me the max length of the field. And that's going to be it for the first row. And then this loops through the query results, and it's going to create rows. You can see I've got my row number right there, and then I've got each of the fields in there and what data is in the field. And then that ends the table, and this stops the stopwatch. And if it was above a really long time, or a very short time, I mean, then it's going to say the query runtime in seconds, and it's going to spit that out to the screen. And then that just clears things up at the end. So let's take a little peek at it so you can see it in action. We didn't really cover this part yet, but you can see I've got records in the people table. That is coming from the other program. Here's where it says query. And query is coming from, I don't see it right off, so I'll do a search. Query, nope, oh, there it is. Query, and then this is the select statement that was passed from the calling program. And that's listed right there. And then found 108 rows, there's the found whatever rows. And then this is the row right there, where it corresponds to this. Let's switch it to a row so you can see it in action. And see, now I got a row right there. But I'm going to go back. Then I've got the name of the field, which is key, and all the other fields, and you can see the field type and the max length right there, and I've got them in italics. I'm doing that with just an I. I went old school on this one, I guess. And then it loops through the data. Dun, da, da, da. Pretty cool, huh? So that is the pretty table function that I wrote, because sometimes it's just nice to see what's in the table without having to mess around with trying to display it. I've written this once, and now I can use it over and over and over again. Let's move on down through the program. You can see I've got a little bit more CSS in here to style my section title. A lot of times I like to grab the known timestamp so that I can have the whatever format of the date of right now in there. Here I set a couple variables. I have it set for start over equals yep, and that means that I'm going to run through all of this code. It goes on for a little while. There it is. So let's talk about that code. Start over equals yep. I've got it set for 100 people. Let's switch it to 200 and we'll run it here. Oh, 1200. That's too many. We already saw my stopwatch. This is the starter on the clock. This sets the table name. This drops the table. This creates a table, which happens to be the same one. And this, actually that gets ready to create it. And this actually does the creating. And I went ahead and set an index on that right here. And that chunk of code right there does the index. And then I did some manual inserts of the records so we would have some data to play around with. I'll let you see the rest of that query. Pretty cool, huh? So we got some fake people and we've got some fake information. And you can see that I went with person ID, first name, last name, gender, and time created in there. And then I decided I needed more data. So I wrote this little for loop so that it would figure out what ID number to give these people. And it would use the row number as part of that. And here I'm doing a little random action, 0 or 1. This does randomly picks any integer between 0 and 1, which would be 0 or 1. Actually, I guess I would include those numbers. And if it's 0, then I'm going to set the gender to male. And if it's not, I'm going to set the gender to female. I'm not saying females are number 1. I'm just using that as a number. Then I came up with a semi-random date because I wanted it to look like this was done over time. So I do my little date format right there. And then I use this make time, MK time. And this is done in hours, minutes, seconds, months, days, and years. And so that randomly grabs that information. So hours, I'm grabbing up to 24 hours, 60 minutes, 60 seconds. I mean, it's very random on the time. And then I do an insert of all those records. And it does that for this many people. And I already set this many people to be 200 right there. Then I do similar things for the next table, which is called group cross-reference. And I don't do quite as many records on this one. And you can see that I'm doing group IDs and names there. And then I've got a third table called designations. And it does kind of like what I did on the first one. And I did a little bit of random action. Oh, here's my index. And I have a second index. I have an index on person ID and an index on group ID. That's so that I can match them up. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit. And then here's some static records that I put in. I guess we could make this a little bigger, couldn't we? That's better. And then I've got another for loop where I'm going to create some random stuff. And it does it for this many people again. And it puts their ID in and a row number. It's similar to the first one. But here I'm going to put, is that ID number right? It is. Oh, because I start off with 100 there. I use the same numbers. So normally you're not going to do this on a table, but I wanted to have some data to work with. So this is going to randomly put people in groups right there. And I don't need that line right there. So I do the semi-random date again, and then I do my inserts. And here I did them for different dates, just so we could see some differences. And that stops my stopwatch, and that says how long it took to make the table. And then we get into some query stuff. So let's go ahead and make this a little smaller. We're going to run this for 200 people. And you can see it did all the stuff that I said I wanted it to do. And the time to create the tables and insert the records was 0.15 seconds, which is pretty darn fast for 200 records. So let's do a little fun thing here. Let's do 1,000 records. No, let's do 1,000 records. How long is 1,000 records going to take? Oh my gosh, it was 0.7 seconds. How could we even wait that long, right? All right, I'm going to do this one more time. I'm going to do it for 100 records because that was quite a bit to look at. All right, so that didn't take any time at all. So my queries are down here. Oh, I should probably mention this. Our index is important. When I put in 10,000 records, I did it with index, and it took 3.31 seconds. And when I did it without indexes, it took 3.35 seconds. That's basically the same, so it really didn't matter for inserting records. So I said, what if running this query that we'll talk about later, people with all of the groups that they are in, if any, this will be a wide table. With indexes, that took 0.62 seconds, and without indexes, it took 214 seconds. So yes, indexes are important. What is an index? An index basically organizes your files so that it can find them quicker. Ta-da, there it is. Okay, now let's move on. We've got the table name of people, and this just does a little echo out using some CSS to style it. It says records in the whatever table, and you can see where it says records in the people table, right there. And then this says select star, which means select all from that table, and I'm going to do a limit of almost 100,000, which I really don't need at this point. But drawing a table of 100,000 records on your web page can take a little while. So a lot of times I do put some kind of limit in there. And this is the table dump. It's the pretty version using that list plane, and you can see all my data. Pretty cool, huh? Let's go to the next query. Select, oh, did I miss one? Oh, no, I didn't. Group cross-reference. So records in the cross-reference table, this is the same kind of select. And now you can see my records. So here I'm using a group ID and a group name. What we're going to end up doing is we're going to tie together the people information with the person ID to designations down here in the designations table called person ID. And then I'm going to use the group ID to tie that down here in the designations table. And then that will let me figure out where people are supposed to be. So here's the table dump of the designations table. So again, what I'm doing is I'm saying Bob Doe is this ID number. And then I'm saying musicians have this group ID of 991. And then I'm saying right here that Bob Doe, because that's his number, is in this group number, 991. And later you'll be able to see that Bob Doe is a musician. Pretty cool, eh? So why do I do that? It's so that maybe one person's managing who the people are, and a second person can manage who the groups are, and a third person can manage who's in which group, so that you can allow for different security. Or you can also do it so you can have different web pages to allow maintenance of that information. All right, so those are the table dumps. Now we're getting to the cool stuff. Show the group name for each person in a group. A person may appear more than once. So this grabs all the records from people, group cross-reference, and designations. And it's going to grab some of the information from the people table, and it's going to grab the cross-reference group name. It's going to say where the people ID is in the people table and the designations table, and there's an ID matchup on the group cross-reference table and the designations table. So that links them all together. And then I'm going to order it by last name and first name. And there it is. So you can see that Bob Doe is a musician, and Bob Doe is an artist, and Bob Doe is a scientist. And this fake person that I made is a good speller. And this fake person I made is a bad speller. Neat. And that query didn't take any time at all to run. Next query, same as before, but using an alias for the table names. So here, instead of saying people dot first name, I said p dot first name. So you figure out what your alias is going to be there, and then you use that all throughout the query. Use it there, you use it there. You get the picture, right? Otherwise, it's the same query. Should have the same number. Next query, people that are not in any group. So this one is looking at the people table only. Right there, I'm using my alias again. And the person ID is not in the designations table. Sometimes you see more speed from a database when you put this kind of thing in there, matching up on the person even though they're not in there. And sometimes you see more speed if you leave it out. And you just got to kind of play with it a little bit to see how your database works. So poor Jane Doe, she's not in any group. Let's see, groups without any people. These would be groups to get rid of, and we don't have any of those because I created a whole bunch of people and put a whole bunch of people in groups. But if we did, then they would be here. So when I was testing earlier, I had fewer people, and I did have some groups without people. So this is getting group information from the group cross-reference table, and basically doing the reverse of what we did for the people. And it's looking for people where they're not in the designations. The next query is people with all of the groups that they're in. This will be a wide table. This is actually not true. So let me rename that. People with the groups that they're in. Do a little search with some of the groups that they're in. Should we run that? Okay. So this is using a case. You may have heard of an inner join or an outer join. A case works similar to that. It's a little different, and that's the way that I prefer to do it. So what it's doing here is it's saying, excuse me, when I find any records where, from these two tables, where the person ID is in the designation table and the group cross-reference matches up and the group cross-reference name, group name, is musician, where it's less than 1. So basically when I don't find any records that match that, then null. So put a blank in there. If I do find information, then I want to grab the group cross-reference group name, and I want to limit 1. I shouldn't have to do this, but if I have problems in my database where it could be listed more than once, this takes care of that problem. So grab the group name, if I find it, and put it in the musician table column. So this is a new column that doesn't exist anywhere. I just kind of made it up. Right there, musician. And if I wanted to say as blah, there it is as blah, and now blah, the blah column has musician in it. So I kind of like having a musician, so we'll leave that there. Then I did another one of scientist, and this one I did a little bit different. The top is the same, and if I don't find the record, do a null. Otherwise, here I'm just going to say scientist, because I already know what group they're in. Depending on what kind of information you're trying to pull from the table, you may or may not know that. In this particular case, it's the same information, so there's no reason to really type it, other than if you're lazy. Of course, you can be lazy different ways. Let's move on to the next one. This one is way cool. And we're going to look at the code on this one. Make it a little wider for us. Where do we go? There we go. Let's get really fancy by dynamically creating a case for every group by doing a select on the table and looping through to generate our SQL to use later. All right, so this is doing a query on the group cross-reference table for the group name. And then I do some cool stuff here to pretty up the names if I've got some goofy characters. Right up here, found the name. And then we've got the display variable names right there. And this is creating something called this one. And this should look familiar to you. That's the first part where it says, is a person in the group? If they're not, then put a null. And if they are in the group, we've already seen this too, then grab the group name. And then we're going to set that as, I'm going to do a string to lower and a string replace to get rid of the spaces and replace them with underscores if there are any spaces. And I'm going to use the display variable name. So for the first one, it's going to be musician. And the next one, it's going to be scientist and so forth. And then this creates a variable. And the dot equal means continue adding to that variable. You will see up above that I set that to blank, which is called instantiating a variable. And then I append to that as I loop through. So what do I get with that? I get the artist, and then I get the bad speller, and then I get the chef, and so on and so forth for all the groups. So that's building the columns out that way, to the right. And then the rest of the query says, go ahead and grab everybody. Get all the people, and then if they're in any of those groups, then show that, and if they're not, still show the person, but show that they're not in that group. So that grabs it for everybody, where, I should actually have something like this, where group person ID is not blank, and then I'm ordering it by the last name of the person, and then the first name of the person. And there's my table. Way cool. One more and then we'll call it a day. We've got this one down here. Total number of people in a group broken down by gender only counts each person once if they're not, if they are in a group more than once. So this does a count, and I'm creating my own field again, number of people, and it's getting the gender, and it's getting all that from the people table, and it's saying where the person ID is in the designations table, and then I'm going to group it by gender, and I'm going to order it by gender, which we haven't done those two. The group by squishes them together. The order by says displayed in this order, and here I'm going to do a limit again. You could change the limit. Let's change the limit to 2, and we'll rerun it. So now it's only going to show, if I can find my mouse somewhere, there it is. Now it's only going to show 2 records, limit 2, right there. But we really have, well, actually that's all we have for this one. Let's limit 1. So we should only see females. And there it is. Let's limit to 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. And we're still only going to see 2. And this means that we have, out of all the people, we have 51 females in a group, and we have 46 males in a group. And if a person's in a group more than once, they only get counted 1 time. So there is some relational database stuff for you. You can see that if you use indexes, it can be fast. I mean, that's darn fast. We did a search on all those records, and we found it in 0.01 seconds. And let's come back up to this number. This is when I had 10,000 records. That last query, or second last query, took less than a second to come up with the results. That's darn fast. All right, so I hope you found that informative. I know it was long, but You can review it at your own leisure, and hopefully that helps you with understanding relational databases. See ya.